What's up, everybody? This is General Blue, talking in post right now. Cold and I have not been able to record in a long while due to job updates, and this episode here, this was originally an episode where we were talking about the Pokemon games. When we recorded this, we were still going by the Kings and Generals title, and there was a bit of a problem with a lot of background noise, and the end is basically inaudible because some thunderstorms were rolling in where we lived. So we were kind of at odds on what to actually do about this. At one point, I actually thought I had lost the file, but thankfully, we can give you what we have. There is going to be a point where it somewhat awkwardly ends, but we feel as though we can't really restate everything we said in this video in a later video because we want to talk about the most recent manga chapters. We want to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So those are what we'll be talking about next. Until then, I am going to keep myself quiet. I will interject a bit when the cuts come in, but they're not until way later in the episode. So, without further ado, this was my weird attempt at a rap intro. Warm it up, Blue. Warm it up, King Cold. Warm it up, Blue. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kings and Generals, Episode 6. I am General Blue.
And I am King Cold.
And today, we're going to be discussing Pokemon.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped my headphone in the intro on my left here. But yeah, Pokemon today. Just the mainline games, none of the side games, because I personally have never played. I played one Mystery Dungeon game, and that was like 5 years ago, so I'm not going to really talk about that, unfortunately, to any of those Mystery Dungeon fans out there. Yeah, but the main games I've noticed... Go on.
The side games can kind of be their own discussion, and I'd go on for a while longer about those, but yeah, this is going to be strictly the mainline games.
Yeah, so I've noticed lately in the Facebook groups I'm in, there's a lot of people who love to trash on Pokemon, but they also will like vehemently defend the older generations. Now, I don't see Gen 1 get defended very much because Gen 1 was really janky, and it was the hot craze. It was the big new thing, so I think people understand that the first attempt didn't go so gracefully. But Generation 2 onward, I see those generations get... Generation 2 to 5, more particularly, I guess he defended very well. While I'll see Generation 6, 7, and 8 get called like unplayable garbage and stuff like that. And I don't know why. Because I've noticed Pokemon, for at least the mainline generations, besides graphical, minor mechanic tweaks and Pokemon changes, I feel like you could safely say that it hasn't changed very much from that starting generation.
I can largely agree with that. I do think that... I know that in the early 2010s, the phrase Gen 1er was very popular in the Pokemon fandom from people who pretty much were boomers in the scene and didn't really want to play anything past the first two generations, largely because, the first two games, they were definitely influential, or I should say the first two generations. They were very influential. They really set the foundation. They got the franchise moving in the right direction. But now that you have a plethora of not just later Pokemon generations, but also later similar style RPGs to compare them to, there's fundamentally no purpose in going back to play them outside of the remakes unless you find a dirt cheap copy, which is a lot easier said than done.
Oh, yeah. I'm not even going to get started on the secondary market for Pokemon. Like, I just have a copy of Fire Red. Now, prefaces, Fire Red's my favorite game. It was my first ever Pokemon game. Technically, Yellow was, but I was like 5 years old, and I didn't really play Yellow, if that makes any sense. I kind of just walked around the beginning town because I was like 5 years old and very silly. But so for me. So the most recent Pokemon game I have played was a ROM of Pokemon Crystal, and I remember having fun with it. After I kind of sped through the initial playthrough though because it was so simple, and the level curve was so fucking weird in Gen 2 that I just had a a dummy fix starter and called it a day because I don't like grinding in the early gens because it's kind of like annoying. But I noticed I noticed some weird things that I was missing. Catch XP is something you don't know you love until it's gone. I plan on doing a shiny only playthrough of Fire Red, and the grinding is like the part I'm like more worried about than the actual shiny hunting. Because I remember when I was doing the playthrough of Crystal, even for my starter, I did have offhand Ampharos as my secondary, and even grinding for just one Pokemon in that real early gen, it took a long time to grind it for it to catch back up to my starter's level.
Yeah, the early gens were pretty notable for having issues with that, where you basically fell into one of two camps, which was where you would get a large number of Pokemon for your team very early in the game, and you would have to train each of them up so that they wouldn't get obliterated by major opponents, or you saved the 5th and 6th until the very end, and you had to make sure they were like swapping them in and out of fights just so they could actually stand a chance against the later opponents as well, almost kind of like they are just there in your team for the sake of having a 5th and 6th member. I will say that in my playthroughs of Gens 1 and 2, more specifically the remakes, that was kind of a notorious issue I encountered, largely just because, trying to balance your team for a competitive multiplayer aspect is one thing, but just in the purpose of the single-player campaign, if you really want to cover all of your bases, you have to wait a long amount of time in order to get anything that can really get you out of every given situation you'll encounter.
Yeah, the uh the early game of Pokemon I think is my favorite for any generation because you have unevolved starters, baby, the beginning stages of most of your Pokemon, and it has that starting your adventure feel. I feel like Pokemon nails that concept of starting an adventure and going on it. And even to this day, as a jaded adult to the world, starting a Pokemon game, or like starting a Pokemon game for me feels a lot like starting a Zelda game, where that journey and excitement, even though you know the game in and out, always feels kind of nice.
I can largely agree with that, and I do think that the early parts of the game are generally the best. Usually, by the time you make it to the Elite Four or the final boss or whatever, and everybody's like level 50 plus, it pretty much just becomes, we kind of talked about this in the Yu-Gi-Oh episode, but the same principle applies. If it takes longer than 2 turns for a single Pokemon to get finished off, that's considered a rarity, basically.
Yeah, Pokemon One, now competitive Pokemon's a vastly different beast. And I do remember I tried competitive Gen 7. It was just a Mega Charizard YT. It was basically my Kanto team mixed with Gen 7, like the only Gen 7 one being Tapu Koko. And I had a Tyranitar on the team instead of an Omastar, and that was about it.
I only
But
really
I
tried
remember,
competitive for the Gen 3 remakes. That was about it. And even then, I can't even say it was truly competitive. It was just with other people I knew.
yeah, I have a lot of respect for the Wolfie TCG and stuff like that. The people who do competitive Pokemon, because it is Pokemon PvP, like trainer for trainer, is pretty fun, but it also has a lot of luck to it. So I have never let the Pokemon's player first player aspect try to sour my opinion of the series, because RPG turn-based games, you can find a lot of cheese and a lot of things that just ruin the game for the opponent. So that's not I don't think you should judge. Ooh, excuse me, I got a hiccup. Judge the game off that. I will say, I do find it weird that people seem to focus a lot on Pokemon plots. So I understand the plots of Pokemon games, is what you're playing. You're going through that. But you'd be kind of surprised how very confusing they are, even for the writing level of children's game. like Gens 1 and 2 seem pretty straightforward. Stop Team Rocket, become Pokemon champion. But from Generation 3 onwards, it kind of became like little child goes out in the world and stops the equivalent of God Pokemon, destroying the world. And I didn't catch on to this until I really like sat down and looked back at Gens 3 through 5, even 6, 7, and 8. Like the plotline of Gym 8 focuses so heavily on your gym challenges and clearing the 8 gyms that your character even has endorsements. And it brought up a lot of questions of like, for me, why didn't earlier Pokemon games make the gyms feel as important as this? And why do the gyms of the early gyms kind of feel like this weird formality versus like something that's genuinely important in the universe?
Yeah, the plots can go one way or another. I know that these technically count as spin-offs, but the GameCube games Colosseum and Gale of Darkness, when they started having a bit more complicated plots, they weren't a huge leap from Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, but they at least had a lot more characterization and progressive interaction with like the main antagonists in more neutral settings before we actually got any kind of big reveal or big direct conflict. But even then, that was more just an idea of what they were trying to do in that specific world, and that's still kind of like it's a cohesive plot, but the actual stakes don't really seem that bad compared to some of the concepts introduced in the following generations. Like, I mean, let's be fair. The Apex is still probably 4 and 5 just because of how powerful they tried to hype up the legendaries in those generations, and how, to some extent, you're facing them like, they're not just before you get to the Elite Four. They, like, take precedence over the Elite Four.
Yeah, like, I'm not. I power scale for Dragon Ball occasionally, but Pokemon, I couldn't even begin to think about how you would do that, because, like, Dialga, Palkia, Garatina, and Arceus are probably, like, the strongest Pokemon. Somebody tried telling me Hoopa was, but I don't think you battle Hoopa in the Gen 6 game, so it doesn't really matter. But, like, yeah, Gen 4, you literally fight Pokemon gods. And I think it's perfectly fine for Pokemon to have like hierarchies and like concepts of divine beings, but it does feel really silly. Like it feels like how the Egyptian god cards feel really silly when you think about it. It's like, why do we need this in this universe?
So, I mean, like, the Egyptian gods can sort of make the excuse that they tie into the whole theme of ancient Egypt, whereas the cards they made later in the show that are supposed to have similar power levels, they specify their level of rarity or the restrictions in place or how the power from them could destroy the world. But I mean, you know, I remember a bunch of old, early era YouTube videos from after Gen 4 came out where they were just making jokes about how they encompassed, like, the high number of legendaries, especially in Gens 4 and 5. Well, mostly 4, because I think Gen 1 you only had a handful, Gen 2 was about the same number, plus like 1 or 2, Gen 3 a slight uptick, and then Gen 4 you had like over a dozen legendaries. So many people were saying that by the time they got to the 5th generation, they wouldn't even really have viable legendaries because they'd just kind of be retreading old ground. Which, to some extent, that was true, but at the same time, I mean, the legendary dogs in Gen 2, which was Suicune, Entei, and Raikou, they all just mirrored the elements of the legendary birds from Gen 1, Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno.
Yeah, they just didn't have the flying typing. But Suicune's also a water type. But like, I think like,
Oh, yeah.
I think like a lot of people, and now it's perfectly fine to have nostalgia for games you grew up playing. Like Ocarina of Time is like my biggest nostalgia game next to Link to the Past, and they're not even like the best titles of Zelda anymore, at least in my opinion, because I think, you know, like Wind Waker's more enjoyable than both those games at times. But like Pokemon, I noticed people like they complain about like Gen 6, 7, and 8 being too easy, and that the older games were harder. But I don't think, unless I'm deliberately nuzlocking or putting a restriction on myself to not use items or like to only have my Pokemon like at the exact same level of the NPCs, with no items or something like that, it's very difficult for me to like wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment that the older games were harder. Like Gen 1 is harder, but that's because of its jank and weird, how the special style worked. So I would say that's more because it wasn't a fully realized mechanic compared to the other generations. Like I can understand being annoyed at Gen 6's handholding. Like the whole opening cutscene to get your starter is kind of frustrating, but it at least sets the scene for your friend characters to at least exist in the universe with your adventure. If you care about that stuff, but like, I would also say like Cynthia. A lot of people say Cynthia is like the pinnacle of Pokemon difficulty, but I think it's just because they were like 9 and had like a fully evolved Infernape at level 68.
I mean, there's definitely viable arguments for one generation being noticeably harder than another. I do think, at least in the context of Generation 2, if you compare the original releases to the DS releases, like, on average, the trainer Pokemon that you will fight in the DS games are almost always of a higher level and are intended to be more difficult. That's largely because they did fix a lot of the jank aspects of what constitutes physical and special attacks, because even when they had the split nailed down, it was still a thing where whether or not it was considered a special attack was based on the element of the move and not the move itself. So like Hyper Beam, because it was normal, was considered a physical move, and I want to say like Fire Fist or whatever, that was considered a special move because it's fire element. So they had fixed that, and they realized that they needed to make some of the trainers harder to compensate. At the same time, though, you had more, they had a few more Pokemon in the remakes compared to the originals. Like, I know that at the end of the Gen 2 remakes, you have an opportunity to get a Hoenn starter, but I mean, you've pretty much finished the campaign at that point anyway. It's just kind of an Easter egg at that rate.
Yeah, that's like trade it over to your second game, reset the play, then trade it back, type deal. I think like I still see so Pokemon Sword and Shield. I see a lot of people still just like uncomfortably hating on this game. After like legitimately playing through Sword and Shield, because my first playthrough was with a friend and we co-opted it and we were kind of like we were paying attention but not really. You know, when you enjoy something with a friend for solo, the experience is always a little different. When I actually played through the events of Sword and Shield, the things that stuck out to me the most was the wild area. I liked the wild area a lot. That was really cool. And I also really liked the fun enough, I liked Leon and the characters in the plot, because like they had some of the better rivals in my opinion, except for Hop. Hop unfortunately was just Hal from Generation 7 repackaged, and I felt so bad for him. I guess they just wanted the character to connect to the champion. I don't know, just weird decision. But like Mary, how do you say her name? Mary, the goth girl, and then Bede were two rival characters that were on it that had noticeable like actual character traits that I cared about. Like Bede was kind of like this snuffy little can't touch me kid, and then he gets his sponsor dropped just for the weird Queen Elizabeth lady to pick him back up. And I think that was actually like a cool idea that I wish other games did sooner. Because like, imagine if Blue had like a sponsor throughout Red, because he beats you to every gym, right? Like he gets there first. And I feel like if they like did more in the remake of Fire Red, or even Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, to like make him seem like this awesome dude, it would make him as a rival age even better. Because Blue is a pretty infamous rival of being a dick to you, and I think that's always like a plus side.
I mean, what's interesting is it feels like they had the foundation of that for a while, because I don't know what the earliest point in this was exactly, but at least at some point in the early gens, they had the mural. It's like trainers who have successfully beaten this gym. It shows your rival, and then it shows you after you do it. There's that guy who's hanging out at the beginning of gyms trying to hype you up, at least in Gen 2 onward, I think. And I mean, it's I won't really talk about this much in the context of the games, but let's be fair, Gary Oak was basically a celebrity every time he was showing up in the show. So, yeah, the foundation was there. It's just a matter of whether or not they wanted to incorporate that into the main plot.
Yeah, like a lot of people complain about. Oh, this is the big thing I really would like to point out. Is animations in Pokemon games. They they'll talk about the 3 ones having bad animations, but I feel like the entire series, like especially the mainline games, have always kind of had really low level or really bare minimum animations compared to a lot of RPGs. Because okay, so in the first few gens, your Pokemon might move when you send them out. They'll like do a little dance and that's it. Then they stand in an idle animation, like an idle frame, and when you attack, like if you use Charizard and shoot Flamethrower, it'll just be a particle beam that comes out of them. And when the enemy uses Flamethrower, it'll be like coming out like of his chest area. I noticed a lot of Pokemon games do that, and then when you take damage, they'll either, depending on the duration, they'll either blink, or they'll have a recoiling animation of pain, which started in the 3D gens. Because someone tried saying that Gen 5 was the most complexly animated Pokemon game, because the Pokemon sprites are always moving. But I feel like that's kind of wrong, because the sprites, yes, are always moving and look fine, but like, you know how Samurott in Gen 5 will pull out a sword out of his arm and put it back? He doesn't have like a unique attacking animation with that in mind. His model will jump up and down or move side to side to represent. Ooh, that was a. Hold on.
I agree with what you're saying with how the movement
Did that
was an improvement.
Did that crack of thunder get picked up on your mic?
No.
Okay, yeah, because I saw a fly. That just like jump scared me because I just. Yeah, I'll finish this off real quick for your retort. Is like, he'll move side to side, hop up and down, or shoot a beam out of like what appears to just be this general area. They're not actually doing like these big, complex animations where the character where like Samurot's like charging a aqua razor slash with his sword, and then the character model actually moves to do a slash. It just has a shell go over your character, and then your character will blink and recoil. There's nothing like... It's not like fighting games or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, even the GameCube games don't really go much further than relatively basic animation. It might be kind of close to what the move is, but it's not like... they don't have unique hit and hurt animations for every Pokemon with every move combination, and realistically they couldn't. I do think that having some level of movement does help in that regard, but you still have some awkwardness with like Pokemon's height relative to the move they're using. It's not as bad as it was in, say, the previous generations from Gen 5, but it's still there once in a while. And I do think that if you compare Gens 4 and 5, how they look with their attacks, to other RPGs that came out on the DS, like the Dragon Quests, the Final Fantasies, some other minor RPGs here and there, you'll see that the animation wasn't as fleshed out as it could have been. And again, there are reasons for that. You can't really have a specific kind of like attack and hurt animation balanced for every single move when there's literally hundreds of these little creatures going around. But there is some level of trying to make it a bit less awkward that you're gonna notice in playtesting.
Yeah, I understand that time is a big factor on why Pokemon tends to go minimalistic at times with its animations. Like, I was recently watching a Did You Know Gaming about Pokemon Ruby Sapphire, and Masuda, right? Masuda was apparently having nightmares and stress-related sicknesses about Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire flopping. And they actually talked about how they did minimal animation work for battle transitions and the battles to focus more on the map and getting a bunch more Pokemon out. And that statement, now granted, that was a statement from a long time ago, but it makes me wonder, does that still apply to the later gens when they have better hardware? because Pokemon games have been coming out yearly now. That in itself can be a problem, and I'm not going to really speak on that because I don't know how the gaming industry works with getting product pushed out. But I know there's people who don't like it, but it's like, there's over 800 plus Pokemon now, and look at Dragon Ball Super's, a lot of Dragon Ball Super episodes. A lot of them either look good or look like crap, and that's just because of time. It's not that they're incapable of making the animation look nice. It's like this big time restraint that they have, and I feel like a lot of people kind of gloss over that. Because, yeah, there are a few scenes in Sword and Shield where the animation is kind of crappy. The infamous wolf Pokemon turning on the axis and walking away is actually kind of inexcusable. But the Pokemon battling animation, I feel like a lot of people are way too harsh on, considering that every Pokemon has a Gigamax animation, and I could only imagine the amount of fucking time that took alone to get into the game.
Yeah, and I mean, like, just in regards to how they kind of have to space everything out and make it work to meet their deadlines. I mean, in regards to how they keep saying during, like, Smash Bros. Presentations about the difficulties in designing multiple characters, like, when they introduced Pyra and Mithra, they basically said that they couldn't work in the same way as the Ice Climbers because in Smash with, like, 4 or even 8 people, it would actually screw up the game because of the different animations going on at one time. Aside from that, I think that the animations themselves and the Pokemon not looking incredibly great is one thing. It's a minor inconvenience, but it's definitely manageable. I think that to a large extent people had a problem with a lack of originality in the designs. I don't really hear this argument much anymore, but the first 4, maybe 5 generations were notorious for just having a lot of the same generic, like, bug flying type combinations. There's always issue with the starter being fire fighting type, which I don't remember if Blaziken was the one that started that. I think it was, but
it was.
Yeah, Blaziken, and then for a long while they were trying to deviate from that. But even Incineroar, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's Fire Dark, but it can still learn fighting moves. So it was just a point where they couldn't really get away from that for any good length of time.
Yeah, I definitely remember people making memes about Incineroar going to be a firefighting type. They're like, oh no, it's going to be a firefighting type. And I was kind of giggling to myself about it because I was just like, thinking about it, another firefighting type. Because what's weird is for every generation, I used fire types as my first starter because fire types are usually rare in Pokemon games, especially Gen 4 is notorious. Oh man, Gen 4 with the 2 fire types. But typing is, I don't know, Pokemon typing I think is fine throughout the games. I don't really I'm not gonna sit here and be like the typing should be better and they should be more creative, because it's also a balancing thing too. Like, I remember someone was wanting, what was it? What's a type that doesn't exist right now? I can't remember what they said. It was
fire,
a pairing.
ice, I guess.
I think there's a fire. I know there's a fire water type, but I think it was a pairing with fairy and dragon. I think it was like a fairy dragon type, and they're like, "Oh, we should do fairy dragon." I'm like, that sounds awful. Because that sounds like a balancing nightmare. Because you still have the types and weaknesses chart of what's effective, what's neutral, and what's immune. I think steel, dark, fairy, ground, and flying are some of the only types that have immunities. Because I think steel's immune to poison, ground's immune to lightning, flying's immune to ground, and dark is immune to psychic. And fairy is immune to dragon. Right? So if you have the wrong combo, you'll have the Spiritomb scenario where there's 2 generations where Spiritomb there's no super effective weakness on it. You know, it's just like, oh shit, how do I hit this thing?
Yeah, that was a problem they had with dragons at the very beginning, and I guess ghosts to some extent as well, if I remember right. So, I mean, like, unless they have a really bomb way to explain it, you're not really going to see too many Pokemon of conflicting types. You're not... I mean, we're not just going to suddenly see electric ground Pokemon walking around all over the place, and it makes sense if some generations focus more on one element than another. Like Hoenn, that's a tropical archipelago type area, so it's not at all surprising that there are very few ice types in that region. You know, that's one thing. It's just if this is a continual problem throughout how they go about it.
Yeah, like a lot of people talk about typings and everything, and I feel like it's kind of whatever. Like I don't. One thing I hate is I hate seeing fake mon, like fan made Pokemon, because it's something that just always gets on my nerves. Some of them are designed well, but then like their stat spread will either be ridiculous, or their typing will be ridiculous, or the move pool will be ridiculous. And that's something I've always like trusted Game Freak with Pokemon games to do is like, yeah, there's power creep in Pokemon games, and I understand that. I'm not a silly goose. There's power creep in every game like that. But I feel like they nailed it and hit the mark more times than not when we're making Pokemon versus something like, I don't know, like level curve. I feel like level curve in Pokemon games does get a little annoying. Like, I think Gen 2 is probably like the worst level curve you'll ever get in a Pokemon game.
Wait, in what way do you mean?
So in Gen 2, um, a lot of the gym leaders, because there's 16 gym badges in Gen 2 because they had to fit Kanto in the game. And I personally love that Kanto's in the game. But, you'll be fighting like level 30s by the 7th gym. And the outside of wild Pokemon will be like level 15. And if you have like a full team of 6 in Gen 2, it just requires a monstrous amount of grinding because the Pokemon wild encounters level curves are really low, and most of the trainers are also really low. So you spend a lot more time grinding in Generation 2 because like in my Crystal version, even with the 2 Pokemon I had powering through, I still had to do a decent amount of grinding to get the up in level because I wanted them both to be level 55 for the Elite Four, and it took a while.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem I remember having during the last segment of Johto is because, okay, I know that most people who played the game as kids, they complain about Whitney and Morty being insanely tough for early gym leaders, which, to be fair, they're not wrong. They're tougher than average for like the 3rd and 4th gym leaders, especially compared to what came before them. Then the game kind of eases off for a little while, and unless you have a really bad team combination, you're not going to have too much trouble for a while yet. But then when you get to the 8th gym leader, what's her name, Blair, I think, the dragon-type one, she has a major issue with you because her Kingdra has very few weaknesses to pretty much anything. And then I just remember spending so long grinding to actually take out the Elite Four because Lance was like one of the hardest main campaign bosses for a long while. You pretty much needed a dragon type, which you couldn't really get until around the 8th gym, and if you did, your only real option was Dratini, if I remember right, which took a significant amount of time to fully evolve. So that right there made the end of Johto difficult. And then when you get to Kanto, the game does kind of railroad you to do things in a somewhat specific order, but it's not like there is a little bit of a level of deviation. So, for the most part, you could make the gym leaders a relative cakewalk at that point, too.
Yeah, true. I think like when I played through X and Y for the first time, the first time was actually recently. I think it was about last year. I replayed through it. So, not played through it, replayed. I mean, like actually played through it. I had my starter, which was the water starter, because I Charmander. Whatever the bug type gym leader used, that's what I was using. I had.
So this is the first point where the audio gets kinda screwy, and we end up missing about a minute here. From here on out, it's pretty consistent for the next 10 minutes, and then it's going to more or less reach the end point.
Ah. Okay, well, I guess they'll enjoy this weird side tangent. As I was saying, so for Gen 6, keeping a team of... Now, I noticed the levels were a little bit lower in Gen 6, because Gen 6 was pretty easy. I'm not going to say it was difficult by any means, and this is coming from, like, a seasoned Pokemon player, too. Seasoned, like steak. That was a bad joke, I'm sorry. It was like... It was like grinding in that game, though, to get the Pokemon leveled with the EXP share on and then the catch XP. Felt really nice. I don't think there's ever a point where I had to grind for more than about 20 to 30 minutes. And that's something I greatly appreciate in the newer Pokemon games, is that you can get your team up and running faster to do the trainer battles and gym battles and whatever side plots and encounters the game wants you to have, versus just walking in the grass and running around in a circle.
Yeah, that does help a lot, because the whole idea of constantly running in the grass just to get any level of progress, that's kind of irritating. Also, the alarm stopped, so yay.
Awesome. Hold on out here. My brother texted me. I see a light coming from your car. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Because he's playing Destiny 2 right now. There's like this big event, and with his raiding group, he has to be on this call. So I didn't want to try to record and then like hear him in the background. So just out here in my car. Okay. So I think honestly, I don't know if this is a hot take. The one Pokemon game that I didn't finish, then went back to and still didn't like very much, was Gen 5. Was the first Gen 5 game. It was because it came out when I moved up here, and it came out oh my goodness, Gen 5 is old. I do not remember when Gen 5 came out. I know it came out
2011.
A while. Yeah, oh my goodness, I was still living in the South. Okay, so it came out, and my dad got me, my brother, and my sister it for Christmas, which was pretty cool. And Philip and my sister, they played through it and completed it pretty quickly. They they just binged it for 3 days straight. They fucking love the game. I, on the other hand, distinctly remember getting very annoyed at the setup of Unova, on top of the way the game pretty much would always sidetrack me when I wanted to go to a gym. And I think it's because I really disliked Team Plasma. I had this burning, because I didn't like Team Galactic very much, but they were whatever. But there was something about Gen 5 and Team Plasma and the overall setup of how that game was played, how you traverse Unova, that as a kid I didn't like, and then going back and playing as an adult, it still didn't tickle my fancy very well. I think that's the one generation that I see a lot of people praise as the last good Pokemon game, that I think they excuse a lot of the really weirdness of how it's presented. Because it's a very pretty game for Pokemon. It's probably one of the best looking Pokemon games you'll ever play. But the first gym you can't go into until you go to a new little school, and then you have to go help the Mershana. If I'm correct, you have to go help.
You good?
Fuck it. Drop my phone. This is gonna be a wacky episode. Hold on.
Hey, technical difficulties happen. It is what it is.
God damn it. Yeah, I know. Again, this is our hobby, so I hope this gives this episode a little more character. So so you go into the forest next to the first gym, beat up the Team Plasma Grunt, and then go fight the first gym leader, which is probably the best first gym leader in any of the Pokemon games, because they have three. They have the 3 monkeys that are grass, water, fire, that counteract your starter, so that you'll always have a weak matchup into that first gym, which I will praise, because I loved that first gym so much. Because you even get to catch the rival monkey that would be weak, that would be strong against your starter, and then they had a a Lillipup, I think, or something else on their team to counteract your monkey. And I thought that was one of the coolest things ever. But then the second gym comes around, and you have to. And I remember this distinctly. But I go in to challenge the gym leader, and then Team Plasma steals a Dragonite skull, and you're forced to go chase them. And I was like, okay, that was annoying. And the part that I distinctly remember giving up on was when I went to the third city to go fight the bug gym leader, and he's like, "Oh, I can't. Team Plasma's doing something," and I had to run all the way back to Pinwheel Forest, and I was like, "Fuck this game." I was like the one thing that was like the one generation I actually gave up on playing, and then had to go back to like 2 years later and complete.
I can kind of say my experience was fairly similar, not to as long a length of time that I went without completing it, but like, I definitely felt. I agree that the first gym was one of the best ideas, with basically completing the general trifecta of fire, grass, water at like the very beginning of the game when that comes up. That also kind of introduced another problem to me, because like, when you get the elemental monkey that's supposed to help you for that gym, they can only be evolved with stones, and now an experienced Pokemon player will tell you that a fully evolved Pokemon gains more stats than one in the weaker evolution state, so instinctively you know if you want this thing to be as strong as possible, you should find a stone as fast as possible before it climbs up in levels. So that produces a kind of weird dichotomy where you don't know if you need to just tough it out or if you should keep it in reserve until absolutely necessary. That was a more of a personal issue I had. I do think that Team Plasma trying to inject themselves into the plot isn't inherently the worst thing, because I mean, Team Rocket in the first two generations really only caused problems in some mountainous areas, and maybe once or twice during the story. Aqua and Magma in Gen 3. I mean, if you played Emerald, they were there constantly, but if you played just Ruby or just Sapphire, it wasn't really that bad. And so, I do get PTSD pretty much every time I hear the dang Team Plasma theme, but I think that introducing them as prominent threats wasn't the worst idea. It had its ups and downs, and the main villain was at least someone that you were seeing through the whole series. You actually have like a real climax thing with them. I kind of like what they do with the cover elemental or the cover legendary, where that's like incorporated into the Elite Four a little bit. But I mean, even that kind of has a problem because you have to catch it. There is no option to just tank through it and then try to get through the fight as quickly as possible if you wanted to, which is kind of weird that they restrict your freedom in that regard. But it definitely had its ups and downs. I know that when it first came out, a lot of people had a plethora of problems with it. Nowadays, it seems like most people say it's one of their favorites, which, I mean, I don't agree with that, but it did, at the very least, it did try to fix a good number of problems that people were complaining about in previous games.
Yeah, I can understand that. You know what's funny? Leading back to the animation thing, fun fact that I noticed when playing against, because now Getsis was super hard for me on my one playthrough because I only leveled up my Emboar, and then I caught the rush around with a quick ball. So I had to like redo the Getsis fight a few times. Not the Getsis fight, the end fight. My bad, end fight because it's end then Getsis. When you first catch Reshiram or Zekrom.
So unfortunately from there, Cold is more or less inaudible. He comes in very staticky. You could sort of hear him clipping a little bit at the end there, but just to give an example. But that was about as far as we were able to get in this actual recording. So we apologize for keeping the delay for so long in releasing this, but sometime within the next week or so, we are hoping to get out our thoughts on the most recent Dragon Ball Super manga chapters and our thoughts on the recently released Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel game. So thank you all for listening, and have a great rest of your night.